This will be the next lesson in the series on the question, why do we breathe? We're taking a history of science approach. In the last lesson, we learned about the views of Galen, and his views were influential for 14 centuries. It wasn't until modern times with people like William Harvey we're going to put Galen's ideas to the test. Let's recall some of the key ideas of Galen. He thought there were two kinds of blood in the body. There was the blood in the veins, and that blood was made in the liver using nutrients from our food. But then there was also the blood in the arteries, and this blood was made in the heart itself. Air from the lungs was delivered to the left side of the heart, mixed with the blood, heated up, and the blood was purified here. The metaphor was the heart is a furnace. Importantly, in order to have blood in the left side of the heart. Remember, Galen did not think blood moved through the lungs and back to the heart on the left side. Galen proposed that there were holes in the septum separating the two ventricles, and so blood in the right ventricle could move through the holes into the left ventricle. Now, in the adult, there do not appear to be any visible holes, but Galen thought they were just too small to be seen. William Harvey was born in 1578. And died in 1657. So you'll notice many centuries went by before people like Harvey began to test Galen's ideas. Harvey performed dissections of dead humans. Now you'll recall in ancient times this was prohibited. He used these dissections to teach his students. In addition, Harvey performed vivisections, operating on living animals to learn about the anatomy and physiology of those animals. Now, in these pictures in the bottom here, this is a human undergoing open heart surgery. So we see the heart and the lungs here, and here's a closer up view of the heart. Now, Harvey, using animals, would actually remove the heart from a living animal. And if you do that, the heart continued to beat on its own. Harvey watched carefully as the heart slowed its rate of beating. Harvey began to see more clearly what the heart chambers were doing. They were contracting, and so the volume of each chamber was rapidly decreased. Evidently, the heart did not need external nerves to orchestrate its contractions. So a dying heart beats more slowly, and that allowed Harvey to get a better grasp on what was going on. These chambers, these ventricles, were contracting. The volume in these chambers was getting smaller as the chamber contracted, and that would have the effect of expelling blood out of that chamber. Let's take a look at an animation of the heart. We have the two collecting chambers at the top, they're called atria, and the two pumping chambers down at the bottom, they're the ventricles, and here we see the lungs. The right atrium is collecting blood from the body. The right ventricle is going to pump that blood through the lungs. The blood returns in the left atrium, and then the left ventricle will pump the blood to the body. Now, when Harvey removed an animal's heart and it began to die, it beat more slowly so he could better see what these ventricles were doing. They were contracting, and so that's going to be forcing the blood out of the ventricle. There are these one-way valves that prevent blood from going the other way. So notice then, while Galen had the furnace metaphor for the heart, Harvey introduces the modern metaphor. The heart is a muscular pump. And perhaps it's not surprising, there were technological devices, pumps, in Harvey's time. They did not exist in Galen's time. And so oftentimes the technology in our society serves as a resource for making metaphors to understand something new in terms of something we're familiar with. There were pumps around in Harvey's time, and so he began to think of the heart as a pump. Now let's return to Galen's belief that the blood could move from the right ventricle through the holes in the septum to the left. Harvey began to question this. After all, what he saw in observing a dying heart is the ventricles were contracting at the same time. Now, simultaneous contraction did not make sense if blood was supposed to just move in one direction from the right to the left, because after all, wouldn't blood also be forced from the left to the right through those same holes? Now, beyond this, Harvey's going to directly test this idea that there are holes in the septum. He's going to get an animal heart. He's going to plug up the points of entry and exit to the ventricles, and he's going to inject high pressure water into the right ventricle and to look and see whether any water emerges in the left ventricle. If indeed there are holes in the septum, we would expect water to emerge in the left ventricle. We can see the reasoning here. If fluid can pass through the septum through tiny holes, and we inject high pressure water into the right ventricle, then water should emerge in the left ventricle. Harvey's results, no water was found in the left ventricle. And so since the result does not match the prediction, we say the hypothesis is weakened. So Harvey did an experiment. And as a consequence of his results, if we now eliminate this idea that there are holes in the adult septum, it means we now have that puzzle again. How does blood get to the left side of the heart? Well, that led Harvey to begin to suspect that blood on the right side was being pumped not just to the lungs to nourish them, but through the lungs and returning to the heart on the left side. This then suggested a kind of a circuit, a heart to lungs to heart circuit that eluded Galen's grasp. This is the scientific spirit, interacting with nature to test ideas. Now, Harvey didn't just study the human heart, he studied the hearts in other animals as well, also animals without lungs, and he found an interesting pattern. For example, on the left, this is the modern view of the circulatory system of a fish. But what Harvey noticed is that animals with no lungs only had one pumping chamber, one ventricle. But animals with lungs, like mammals and birds and reptiles, had two pumping chambers. So it suggested to Harvey that that second pumping chamber, the second ventricle, was associated with the lungs. And so it started to crystallize in his mind that the right ventricle, its job was to pump blood through the lungs. Blood would return on the left, and then the left ventricle would pump blood out to the body. So Harvey's beginning to think of a circuit. Harvey suspects a heart-lung-heart circuit. But what about the body? Was there a heart-body-heart circuit? We'll take that up in the next lesson.